Welcome to TriloTalk. This is a podcast dedicated to topics that we think are important to the profession of medical writing. And our goal is to bring topical issues to the forefront and hopefully spark conversations in the wider domain about these issues.
I'm Julia Fianich-Klaproth, Senior Partner at Trilogy Writing and Consulting, and I'm here today with two of our medical writing managers, Bhavna Bazin and Barbara Baghetti. Both Bhavna and Barbara spend much of their time writing submission dossiers, and today we thought it would be fun just to take a closer look at clinical overviews. So good to have you here with me today, Bhavna and Barbara. I'm looking forward to tapping into your experience on these documents.
Hi, Julia. Hi, Bhavna.
Hi, Barbara. Hi, Julia. Well, I must say that clinical overview is one of my favorite documents, so I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Excellent. Me too. So, yeah, the clinical overview really is, I think, one of the most interesting documents to write. It is the pinnacle of every submission dossier, right? It's where we pull together all the information from the clinical trials to provide a critical assessment of what it all means. And of all the documents we write, this one is really where we have to get down into the strategy, where we're weaving together everything we know from the clinical program. First, to define why is there a medical need? What is that? And then to demonstrate how the benefit-risk balance of the drug really merits its value as a treatment option. So let's start from Barbara. What would you tell someone who'd never written a clinical overview if they were asking how it differs from other clinical Module 2 summaries?
Yes, well, at first, the clinical overview, or Module 2.5, is intended to provide a critical analysis of all the clinical data presented in the Common Technical Document, or CTD. And of course, it refers always to the data provided to the clinical summaries, like you said before, the 2.7s, and to the clinical study reports. But what we want to remember that it should present conclusions and implication of this data, and not just to repeat them. And I think this is something important to remember because we find always teams a bit confused because they don't understand the difference between the clinical summary and clinical overview. In fact, the clinical summary, it should provide a detailed, factual summary of all the clinical data. But the clinical overview should present a discussion and interpretation of these findings.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that's the big distinction, right? The
Yes.
summaries are there to get all the data together.
Exactly.
But not so much to go down into, and what do we think it all means in the context of the big picture?
Exactly. But clinical overview, that's why it's meant to be a critical analysis of all the data and not just repeating again.
And if you think about the regulations, I mean, the fact that clinical summaries are hundreds of pages and a clinical overview is meant to be 30 pages, that already tells you kind of the key intention behind these two different documents, right?
And this is something that we maybe also discuss about the page length. This is something that also is complicated sometimes to keep at the length that's meant to be 30 pages because the teams tend to repeat and repeat again and copy paste from the summaries, and that's not what we want. We want it to be short and concise and critical analysis.
How much struggle have you guys had in getting teams to actually stick to that page count?
It's always a challenge because, as Barbara said, that ICS says we should have a clinical overview 30 pages long, but it also says, depending on the complexity of the dossier, we can include the page count. So we have to make the client understand that it's not something that's set on stone. So if you're working on a high complexity dossier where we are including data from several pivotal studies, supporting documents, that we will exceed the page count. But our focus should be on quality and not quantity. We should avoid redundancy because we already have detailed data in the summary documents. So we should just focus on key findings and messages that we will be deriving from the summary documents.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. So the other thing that we have to think about with these overviews is that we're not just submitting them to one region. These dossiers get submitted all over the world, primarily often first either the EMA or the FDA. What is your experience in the differences for a clinical overview if you're submitting to one region or the other?
While both the FDA and EMA require comprehensive clinical overviews that cover similar content in terms of safety, efficacy, and benefit risk profile of the drug, the FDA's has a specific requirement for the presentation of benefit risk information. And as per FDA's benefit risk assessment guidance, applicants must present benefit risk information in a tabular format. It's a structured approach that streamlines the evaluation process by making sure that the key benefit and risk information are clearly outlined for the reviewers. On the other hand, EMA's approach to benefit risk assessment is more narrative. There is no strict requirement of presentation of benefit risk data in a tabular format. So I must say the amount and type of information are quite similar. The only difference is in the presentation of benefit risk data.
Mm-hmm. Although the interesting thing is, I think that table that the FDA has come up with is an excellent way of presenting those key pieces of information. And there's no harm in having it in both a European or a US dossier. You can expand on those things in text, but I'll be curious to see whether or not more and more companies start including it in the European overview as well, just because it is a great way of pulling those key bits of information together.
I think more and more they will use the same. Why not? I mean, there are nothing against, isn't it? There
There's
are no instructions against, so can only improve.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's a great starting point. And also the assessors at the agencies will probably love having it to pull into their assessment reports.
Yeah, they will benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we sort of get down a little bit more into the weeds here? Obviously, the overview is covering multiple different topics. It's not just about, the efficacy. And in fact, it starts out with an overview of the biopharmaceutics. So what would we need to think about? If somebody had never written an overview before, what would we want to tell them that's important when you're writing that section?
Yeah, I mean, the first two sections are the overview of biopharmaceutics and the overview of clinical pharmacology. And I think I would say for both sections, the first one, the biopharmaceutics, is mainly a critical analysis of aspects related to bioavailability. And the clinical overview of clinical pharmacology is a critical analysis of the pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and immunogenicity. In my experience, and I think you are maybe sharing the same experience with me, these two sections tend to be a little bit too dry. And I think that adding more graphics would improve the quality and the readability and understanding of these two sections. And also what we notice is that at first draft, they tend to be too long. I would say that we should target to a maximum of 2-3 pages.
Yeah.
We all agree that anyway, these two sections are not the most exciting part of the story.
Which can be a challenging battle when you're talking to your clinical pharmacologists, of course, because for them, obviously, that data is essential. It's very important. And they probably remember when it was being collected, right? And you have to help them understand that while it is completely relevant, and I mean, it's an essential piece of the whole storyline, it isn't the most important necessarily.
Yeah, I agree.
And I love your suggestion for more graphics, particularly, your PK data. It's showing trends, it's showing patterns. And what better way to demonstrate that and make it really clear than by having a nice graph that shows you, how does the drug go up and down in the system over time?
Of course. as usual, graphics are speaking more, and better than text. So
Yeah.
I would just recommend to use it for these two sections.
Totally agree. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think I can think of very few clinical overviews that really have some good graphics in that section. Yeah.
Or text. Yeah, there is much to text. Yeah.
And actually, having said that, it's usually not the most important part. I remember we wrote a dossier once. It was for the drug Lantus, and it was about having a long-acting insulin, a basal insulin. And actually, it was the PK profile of the drug that showed its long-acting nature. And we said it should be on the cover page of the clinical overview. We thought that was the most important thing in the whole dossier. So yeah, sometimes it really is critical. Okay, so switching gears, let's move on to the efficacy and safety, which is where you really get into the risk-benefit part of the whole thing. What are some of the things that you think people could do better in your experience?
So in the efficacy, we should just briefly describe the study design, primary and key secondary endpoints, focus on key efficacy outcomes and clinical relevance of the findings. We should avoid redundancy because we have detailed messages in the summary documents.
Yeah.
And by repeating them, we will be wasting space and diluting our key messages. And similarly for safety, we can just include key safety outcomes without repeating the detailed tables included in the SCS or Module 274. An important topic that should be included in the clinical overview is the risk mitigation strategy. And it is particularly important for drugs that are associated with some kind of toxicity. And most of the time, sponsors do not spend enough time writing these risk mitigation strategy, as they tend to focus more on efficacy, that's benefits of the drug. But a well-defined mitigation strategy, in my opinion, demonstrates the sponsor's commitment to monitoring and addressing risk. And as we know, our drugs approval is based on its benefit risk profile. A mitigation strategy can tip the balance in favor of drug approval by showing that the risks are controllable,
Right.
making the drug safer for the intended population. And we don't need details of these risk mitigation strategies. We can just include a summary, but that summary should be explicit enough to demonstrate that the mitigation strategy was successful in managing risks and preserving efficacy. The details can go into the exposure response analysis of Module 272 or individual CSRs. So, yeah.
And you'll have it in your risk management plan as well,
Yeah.
the real gritty details. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think ultimately what people always need to have in their mind is that this document is like the counterpoint to the label. And the label is ultimately what we're trying to get approved, right?
Yes.
And so you have to have a clear, like you said, well thought through concept for each of the different parts you're going to have in your label, supported in the clinical overview. And the risk mitigation is one that a lot of teams don't think about until the very end. And then all of a sudden everybody's kind of going, well, I don't know, what are we going to put here? And yeah, it can be tricky. I think as well, it's important to think a little bit differently about the tabular presentations that you have, say, for your efficacy data, because at this level, you need to think about that table you're going to have in your label. And you should try to have something similar in your overview, a consolidated type of tabular presentation, not again, several different ones presenting the different things, because what you're trying to do at this level is pull it all together, right?
Yeah.
How does everything relate next to each other?
I agree.
Get consensus from the team on it already, so that is defined and clear. And that's true.
Yeah, exactly. Another one that I find teams often don't think about until like the last draft are the ADRs, which you're going to have in your label. And everybody gets into this huge discussion of what you're supposed to be presenting. So, it's really making people aware of these things right at the beginning, so that you're not scrambling in the week before you're supposed to be finalizing the document on some of these key things, your ADRs, your risk mitigation concept.
Yeah, and these are the things that should be planned beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a question for both of you. The overview is meant, according to the regulations, to be a critical analysis of the data, right? What kind of challenges have you guys seen in really getting teams to make it a truly critical analysis? Not just a repetition of data in a more condensed way.
But this is the challenge that we always find, at least encounter, that most of the teams are not really prepared to make critical analysis. They rather reiterate what is already written in the modules, module 2.7s. And it's like they haven't thought through really. So only at the end, when we write the clinical overview and we challenge them, then they have to face it. And it's sometimes the teams don't take the responsibility, or you don't find a person who takes the responsibility to give a statement, to write it down. So it's a challenge. I always find it challenging.
Yeah.
In fact, especially with unexperienced teams.
Yeah. And I mean, they should understand that we should only not only focus on the key messaging, but should also focus on clinical relevance of the findings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's something difficult. It's very challenging.
I have seen teams who really have actually said, we're not here to interpret. We're just here to present data, as if the data speak for themselves. And actually, that's not the intention of this document at all. It was designed specifically to say to the sponsor, we want you to tell us, the agencies now, what you think this means. Convince us that this should be brought onto the market. This is the place you're meant to do that.
And I think this also lately I've seen even more challenging, because some clients decided to change their process and writing the 2.5 ahead of the 2.7s. So this is even more complicated, because I think at least when you write during the process of writing the summaries, the teams get together, they look at the data, they look at the final data, and then they get an agreement on conclusion, and important issues. But if you write the 2.5 ahead, then there is not, this opportunity is not there. And then the risk is that at the end, after you've written the 2.5, a draft, and then the 2.7, then you have to rewrite the 2.5 again. Because of course, in between, things have changed. The data, final data came, the teams met again and again, they reviewed the documents, and what it was written before in the 2.5 is not valid anymore.
Yeah.
So this is something that I find still a bit, not really optimal. And I don't know if this process works.
I totally agree with you, Barbara. I mean, it's fine to sit down and write the whole background and medical need, right? Because that's clear. That's not dependent on the data. But the team really processes the information while they're going through the Module 2.7 summaries. And it's during that process, it's during the debates they have with each other while they're writing those documents, that you begin to see what the sticking points are that need to be highlighted in the overview. And until you've had a chance to have those debates, you actually don't necessarily know what the sticky points are.
Yeah.
In fact, most of the time, most of the time, if you write the 2.5 ahead, then the 2.5 is just, like you said, the background part ready,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
a lot of placeholders, which, I mean, that is really not meaningful.
Yeah. And just to add on, when we are writing the summary documents, sometimes there is a need for additional analysis or ad hoc outputs to support a specific claim or a finding. And based on these additional analysis and ad hoc outputs, sometimes we might need to change our messaging. So if we write clinical overviews before, there is a risk of discrepancies and inconsistencies between the clinical overview and the summary documents, and this could lead to confusion. And as a clinical overview is the final step in assembling a drug's regulatory narrative, it has to be written at the end. And so I don't think this approach is feasible.
I mean, I think it's fine to sit down and map it out, particularly thinking about it in the context of being written in parallel with your label, right? What are we going to have in our label? How is that going to be reflected in my overview at a kind of very high level mapping, right? That's important. That's valuable. It helps the team gather its thoughts, but you can't really craft the story that you're going to tell in the overview until after your Module 2 summaries are fairly well developed. I totally agree. Okay,
I
so
also
folks,
noticed, I just want to say that I also noticed that in the case we write it before, is a continuous update going on. I mean, the writers need to update continuously the 2.5 against the 2.7s that have been written. And this is a lot of work also. And the budget then is affected.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a waste of time and energy, I would say. Yeah, and poor planning.
Yeah. Okay, so folks, the take-home message here is don't try and craft your clinical overview ahead of your Module 2.7 summaries. You'll be spending a lot of time redoing it later on, and that's not a good use of everybody's time, including the reviewers at the core authors who have to review this document, and then they're going to have to review it again later. You'll be saving everybody time and energy.
And money.
And money, absolutely. Okay, well, Barbara Bavna, it was a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for joining us on TriloTalk. And thank you all for listening to TriloTalk today. If you enjoyed it, please come back and listen to us again. If you have feedback on the topic today or any of our sessions, we would love to hear it. In addition, if you have ideas for future topics that you would like us to cover, particularly something you think the community should be talking about, let us know. We would like this to be an ongoing conversation with medical writers and the whole community at large. You can send us comments on our Twitter feed or on our LinkedIn page. And just as a reminder, you can find all episodes of the TriloTalk podcast on all of the usual podcast apps, as well as at www.trilogywriting.com/TriloTalk. Take care, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.